Adieu, oh, et. I say adieu, oh, et.
Fine.
I can see I'll have to try my best at Yankee English. My name is Phillip Pointon, and as you might have guessed, I was born in bonny old England, Shelton to be exact, county of Staffordshire. You may have heard of the place, famous for its pottery. If you was born there, chances are you grew up working in the pits of the potteries. You may have heard of a few of them: Wedgwood, Minton, Dalton. I grew up making pottery like my dad. I had a knack for it. Eventually, I was the superintendent of the Meek and Pot Bank. I can see you might not be knowing what a pot bank might be. That's just our word for a pottery factory. Along the way, I married Miss Ann Johnson. Lovely lass, wonderful wife. Our firstborn, a boy, was named Philip. And we had 6 more. Let's see, there was Emily and Julia and Mary, Samuel, Mayor, he was a boy. And there might have been one other. There's so many, I can't quite. Anyway, we had the 6 children before we came to the States in 1850. I came to Wisconsin on the advice of a Major David Twiggs, who had encouraged settlement, come to England to encourage settlement at Fort Winnebago. Yonder over this direction, I believe. Lots of potters were doing it. I knew with my skills that I could not only work in a pot bank, I could own my own. So, after a long journey across the ocean and the land, we arrived at Fort Winnebago only to discover that all the choice government land was already spoken for. But I had heard of a village to the west called Adams, up and coming, seat of the next county over. So I took my son, Philip Jr., and my daughter Mary, who begged me to come along, and we set out on a 16-mile walk. I liked what I saw in the Baraboo Valley, brought the whole family, bought property in the banks of the river, the edge of the village. It was quite nice actually. We could have a little garden and grow turnips and potatoes, and there was an abundance of wild gooseberries and raspberries and strawberries and plums in the woods all around us. It's quite nice. Now, it would take a while to set up a proper pot bank, so we started out by making bricks. What with having to build a kiln and a drying house and warehouses and all the like, we thought making bricks was a good start, so we made bricks for building, and we also made bricks for ourselves so we could build a proper kiln. It wasn't long before we were making fine earthenware out of the clay up Wendy Bailey's farm. We made all manner of products: crocks, jugs, jars, dishes, spittoons. We even made pots for the garden. Some of these was thrown on the wheel, but we could make things faster if we used a molding machine we had purchased. We made all manner of crocks. We molded a lot of crocks, from the 2-gallon size up to the 5-gallon size. And they was decorated on the outside with a little number indicating the size and a design so as everyone knew they was from Baraboo. Wasn't long we had 3 wagons delivering our goods to the surroundings. That was when things went right. The bad days was when something went wrong in the kiln and it wrecked a whole batch of pots. But that was a lot of hard work for nothing, but all you could do was throw it all out and start over. My son Philip was in the business with me, and we had applied for a patent for a molding machine, new and improved molding machine that we had designed ourselves. We was waiting for the patent when my life was taken in '57. I was only 49 years old. I hope my son, what's his name, kept up the family business. I'd do it all over again. America was good to me. Think of me the next time you put away your dishes.
Now you can come in a little closer if you want to. Okay, I don't bite. Dr. Charles Coles, at your service. You could tell by reading the monument here that I was born on October 5th, 1816 in Geneva, Ashtabula County in Ohio. That's in the northeastern part of Ohio up near Lake Erie. When I was about 16, my father moved us to the wilds of Michigan. But I wasn't there very long because I went back to Ohio to attend college at Oberlin for 1 year. And then I went back to teach school at Battle Creek. It was during this time that I began to study medicine in the office of Dr. Edward Cox and Dr. William Campbell. And then I graduated from Willoughby University as a doctor myself in March of 45. Oh, I forgot the most important thing of all. I married Miss Mary Coles, same last name as mine. She's my sweetheart back in Ohio. Married her in 43. Now, some people may have heard of Mary because of her somewhat infamous involvement in the Whiskey War of '54 in Baraboo, but that's a story for another time. After we had been married a few years, I got the urge to join the movement west. You see, my father and my brother had already moved here. So we packed up our things and we came to the Baraboo Valley in the spring of 1846. Now, there wasn't much here then, a couple of dams and mills. There were a few rough houses around. We built our own cabin about 4 miles east on the road to the Portage. I was the first doctor in the Baraboo Valley, and I soon found out my services were sorely needed. Now, most of the patients did not come to me. Usually, I went to them. One night, I got a call that I was needed to attend to a lumberjack with pneumonia up north on the Lemonweir River. It was just after New Year's Day in 47. And I started out at sundown. I rode the night through 64 miles to get to this patient. Did I mention it was also 26 degrees below zero? Quite a trip. I got to the patient at 4 in the morning. Another time, I got a call to go to Portage. Now, this was shortly after we had completed our cabin, or at least the outside of it. It wasn't much. There was one room and a large fireplace where Mrs. Coles could make us victuals. There would be 2 windows and a door, and I say would because I hadn't gotten around to put in the glass windows or the door. But I did hang a blanket over the doorway, and that seemed to suit well enough. Well, when I got back from Portage the next morning, I found the blanketed doorway barricaded with every piece of furniture we owned. And my wife was quite animated. I didn't have to ask her what happened. She told me forthwith. It seems that after I left, she went to bed that evening with the baby. And during the night, she was awakened by a kind of stirring in the cabin, and found out it was a black bear in the cabin, helping himself to the bean pot that was hanging on the crane over the fireplace. Well, of course, she was terrorized, but she didn't say a word, and she prayed that the baby would not wake up. Well, the bear finally left after he had finished licking the pot clean. Well, I think you know what the first thing I did next was, don't you? I went right down to Garrison's lumber mill and made a door for that cabin. There are a lot of other escapades, but I see you might be needing to move on, so I won't keep you. But I do want to add that Baraboo was really good to us, along with its people, and a lot of new people too. I helped over 1,000 of them take their first breath. Dr. Charles Cowles, the first doctor in the Baraboo Valley. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm respectfully Burritt Clarkson Cochran. I was named after a couple of gentlemen of which my father admired very much. Barrett comes from Elihu Barrett, the blacksmith turned diplomat, and Clarkson comes from Thomas Clarkson, the abolitionist and pacifist from England. And as you may suspect, Cochran comes from my father, the Reverend Warren Cochran. My father and mother Caroline named all 6 of my brothers and only sister after people whom they really admired. My brother, whose name is here, is Harlan Brainerd Cochran, for Harlan Page, the evangelist, and David Brainerd, the missionary to the Indians. My brother and I were both very close, as we were only 2 years apart in age. I was born in Burlington, Wisconsin, in the year of our Lord, 1846. My father had moved us to Prairie du Sac. He had been coming down to Sauk County to preach to the settlers in Prairie du Sac and also in the Baraboo Valley. I think when I was 3, we moved to the village of Adams, the new county seat. My father helped build the first Congregationalist church, both the flock and the building. I remember him help mold the very bricks that were used to build the building. My father, he was a righteous man, not participating in any vice like dancing or drinking and wishing everyone would do the same. Now, when I was 7, an extraordinary event took place here in the village. My father for months had been preaching about temperance, and there were no more than a few taverns here in Baraboo, and one day the women of the village had had enough. They armed themselves with hatchets and other implements and raided the saloons and other stores that sold liquor, and they emptied it into the streets. My father could not have been more pleased. My father, he opened a seminary school, a private school here in Baraboo, which my older brother Harlan and I soon enrolled, learning more philosophy, algebra, and geology. I hadn't yet graduated when the war between the states broke out. My brother soon enlisted and joined the 7th Cavalry Regiment in Michigan. After Gettysburg, he joined General Meade's forces in Falling Waters, West Virginia, attacking Lee's rearguard. He was shot while on his horse and died valiantly in July of 1865. The following January, I soon enlisted and joined Company A of the 6th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. Now, I was able to see through the war, unlike my brother, and I was actually able to take place in Grand Review in Washington. In my company, we fought in places in Virginia like Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor. Now, in July of '65, I came back home after a year and a half of being away. However, I wasn't feeling so well when I came back. I suffered from congestive chills from which I picked up in the South. Just shy of my 19th birthday, I died. And just like how my brother did, close to 19 as well. My brother was buried in Maryland. When I was buried, my parents had him included on his stone, so we could be close in death, just as we had been in real life.
It's quite an impressive monument, don't you think? My husband had it put up upon my death. I'm Annie McDonald, of course. It was really nice of him to put up such a monument, even though he isn't here. I can't blame him for moving on. We were both relatively young when I died. I was only 32. That's why my marker is a tree stump cut down in the prime of life. I was born in New York as Annie Weber. My parents were both Swiss immigrants and moved around a lot. One of my sisters was born in Missouri and another in Illinois, until we finally decided to settle here in Baraboo. We lived under the hill. That's the area around Water Street. Well, we didn't have a lot of money, so me and my sisters had to work at an early age. In those days, a young girl could work as a house servant or a seamstress, but I knew how to cook, which got me a job at the City Hotel run by Mr. Jacobs. It was a decent job, and there were a lot of young men around, mostly railroad men and day laborers. Well, I guess it wasn't long before I fell in love with one of them. His name was William McDonald. He was a brakeman for the Northwestern Chicago Railroad that had a division headquarters here in Baraboo. He was born in Connecticut, to Irish stock, of course, and was moving his way up. We were married right after Christmas in 1881. Well, my husband eventually moved up the ranks and became a conductor in Chicago. We moved there and had nearly 11 happy years together before the end came. It was a dark night late in October. We left the Dearborn station in Chicago around 11 p.m. on the train. The train was actually quite full that evening, and when we reached 47th Street where the railroads cross, something happened. Our train was derailed and suddenly overturned, and despite the valiant efforts of my husband, I was thrown from the window and crushed. It was over instantly for me, and many people were injured. Another man died later from his injuries. My body was brought back here to Baraboo where I had met my husband. My funeral had many elaborate floral arrangements from our friends in Chicago. While this is a peaceful spot, I do wish I could have lived life on this earth just a little bit longer.
Hanach, hinikarigiwi, machete rajara, Washington woman ga higaide. Just wanted to greet you all, welcome you to a new day here, and state that my English name is Washington Woman. Now, although I'm not buried here, these are the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people, and wanted to share a little bit about my story and being here on these lands. My name, Washington Woman, is something that I really like to use after I was able to visit in Washington, D.C., and I was able to join my husband. I was married to Wankajazi. He was a chief of the Ho-Chunk people. And at one point in 1828, the United States government invited us out to Washington, D.C. I was able to join him at that time. Now, the government really wanted to impress upon us some of the might and power of the U.S. government, something that would help encourage us to possibly work with them more in the things that they wanted to do as far as land cessation. But at that time, when we joined, we were part of a delegation that was led by Naga Karamani. And Naga Karamani was all about peace. He wanted peace. In fact, he brought a peace pipe and tobacco to the president, and they shared that peace pipe together. And that was part of that feeling that there would be a new era. Maybe it wouldn't turn out the way that many of our people thought it would. And eventually, though, as many of you may know or may not know, there were actually forced removals of the Ho-Chunk people from their land. Now, after that, although the United States still wanted more and more land, as many treaties did start to be signed. And you know, what really precipitated some of that was the lead mining in this area. Many of the settlers wanted to come in, and this was very, I guess you should say, prospective area for them, and they wanted this land. So there was clash for that, as the Ho-Chunk people were always told that they were stewards of the land. So whatever you take from it, you also give back and you take care of it. So that it can continue to sustain the people for thousands of years to come yet. And that was the thought behind that you were put on this land to take care of it. And it was very important to us to do that. And please come on in, everybody. You're in the sun. No worries. Come on in. Come on in. You don't need to be in the sun the whole time. Thank you. So during this time of more and more land and seeing the hardships that many of the Ho-Chunk people were going through, in 1837, my husband, Wankajazi, went out with a group of tribal elders at this time. Now, they weren't authorized by the Ho-Chunk people or by the chiefs at that time to be signing treaties, but the U.S. government took this as an opportunity to say, we want to do these treaties. And they actually kind of forced it upon Wankajazi. Although my husband did not want to sign any of those treaties, they were forced to. And they were told, if you don't, you will be walking all the way back home. In addition to that, the translator told my husband that the agreement at which point that he did sign to was that it would be 8 years until the people would have to be removed and off these lands. In fact, that treaty said 8 months. So although Wankajazi and myself and we came back to our people thinking we had 8 more years to prepare and get ready, we did see within a couple years forced removals because we didn't leave. So at that time, forced removals, our people were being rounded up, and over again, we continued to come back to this land after that occurred. We were told that our new land and where we needed to be was past the Mississippi River, way out west. That is where we needed to go and be and continue to stay there. And as often as we continue to be sent back, myself and Wankajazi, we would walk back, as well as many others. And as you know, on those removals at that time, many people passed away. This was hard. This was torture to see your relatives and your family and your people die from such removals, when all you wanted to do was continue to care for your people and take care of that land that you felt you had an obligation to do. Well, during this time, we were also invited to go out to Fort Winnebago. So my husband agreed to it. They told us that they would provide provisions at that time. So we went out to Fort Winnebago. However, he was immediately arrested. We were both jailed, he was shackled, and he was forced to agree to a promise. And that promise was to return in 3 days with all his supporters so that they could all be taken and removed and taken to the reservation in Nebraska. My husband upheld that promise, talked to our people. In 2 days we were back and we were removed back to Nebraska. So during this time, again, you can see the love that the Ho-Chunk people had for the land and wanting to continue to come back to where they were used to it. They knew how to harvest their land. We were hunters, we were gatherers, we knew this land, and to be taken so far away was quite the hardship. So then at one point in 1849, my husband thought, in talking with our friend John T. De La Rune at that time, he went to Mineral Point and he went to the local office there and he inquired, can Indians purchase land? So there's nothing to prevent you from doing that. Yes, sir. My husband purchased 40 acres right down the road here. Right down the road there was 40 acres. So finally he found a solution to keep our people together. At some point we had 300 villages and people and families that would join on that land to help us preserve and cultivate our people and our ways and traditions and have powwows there. I did die in 1868 and I was able to pass away on our homeland. I certainly hope, I passed away before my husband, Wankajazi, but I sure hope he was able to do the same. Today, we're at peace, we're happy. There's a lot of thriving cultures in this big world that we call this earth, this Mother Earth. And one of those is our Ho-Chunk people, and I see that. They continue to thrive and survive. So today, I just want to thank you for listening to my words, and that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Zdravo! Kako si? My American name is Joseph Netimovic. We left Serbia to come to America in 1910, if I can remember right. Me, my older brother, Nick, his wife, Katie, and Dan, Nick's brother-in-law. We all came over. Too many wars and no opportunities in Serbia. Things were better here, although it was not pleasant being Serbian when Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Ferdinand in 1914. My brother, Nick, lived on the south side of Baraboo for a while, working odd jobs. Katie had a little boy that they named Emil. I worked near Schulzberg until I came and joined my brother here. We rented out an old farm along the Baraboo River from the widow, Roland. It was a nice place, quiet and secluded. We did a lot of things to make ends meet. When Prohibition came along, we made moonshine. Back in Serbia, everyone knows how to make rakia at home. It is a way of life. Rakia at weddings, rakia at funerals. I don't know why the Americans get so crazy about the little alcohol. When the Prohibition started, I set up a still on the farm and we started making a little moonshine. You could use lots of things: raisins, cherries, even corn. I could get cases of raisins cheap enough and make a mash to make the moonshine. Byron Stevens brought customers to the farm and I made sure that he was taken care of. All through the summer, we had a nice business. It was even better when people came to town. During the fair in September, we sold a lot of moonshine. During the fair, a fellow from Waniwak came and I sold them a couple of pints for $6. Later that day, he came back, but this time with a couple of more fellows and Earl Jakish, who was driving. I thought maybe he's back for some more with some new friends. They turned out to be federal agents looking for moonshine. I told them we didn't have any, but they went looking around. They found 3 of our jugs and put them out in the middle of the yard. One agent guarded those, and the other went looking behind the bar for the still. I knew he would never find it. As I waited, my blood continued to boil. What right did these men have to look around and take our things? What would happen to Nick and his family? I thought I knew that I needed to destroy the evidence. I went to the woodpile, I grabbed the axe, and I smashed those jugs. I was so mad I couldn't think straight. I went after the agent who was yelling at me. He fired his gun into the air. I couldn't stop. I then went after him, and he then shot me. I think he hit me, but I was so mad and it made me even madder. I then went after him and almost hit him. He fired at me 4 more times. Pop, 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 pop. And then I went down. After I came to, I got up and I went back to the house to sit on the steps. After that, I was gone. So much trouble over a little alcohol. I would have never knew that I would be buried here in Baraboo. My brother Nick moved on, but he made sure that I was remembered with this stone here. He was a good brother.
Looks like maybe you got off the stage from Prairie du Sac, maybe, or Kilburn. No matter, you're here now. My name is James Curry. I was born in Ohio. I came to Wisconsin when I was just 13 years old. My family were traveling with a group of folks who were heading west towards Janesville, and Pa decided that we should settle here in Baraboo. Baraboo, of course, in those days was a new town, lots of buildings going up all over the place. My Pa, he was a plasterer, so he found employment easily. I helped him out with the plastering, but then I got a job as a stage driver for Moore and Davis, and I ran the stage line with the help of my darling wife Elizabeth. In fact, I owned it in 1863 from Kilburn down to Baraboo. Of course, that ended when the railroad came in 71. Mind you, it wasn't a bad ending. In fact, it was quite a prosperous ending. You see, the railroad company, they needed someone to move cash, lots of cash, to pay for all the laborers and all the materials they were using to build the railroad. They paid me 50 cents for every $1,000 that I moved. You know, some months I could earn as much as $75. Mind you, it wasn't always easy or risk-free. One night they asked me to take $12,000 from Kilburn down to the bank of Baraboo here. And I was just about to leave in an empty stage when 2 fellas jumped into the back, whispering to each other all the way. Made me nervous. I tell you, I never drove that stage as fast before as I did that night. I wasn't always uneasy, but this was the fall of '69, right after the murder of Schuyler Gates by the Wildrick gang. You heard about that, of course. No? Well, Gates, he was due to be a key witness in the trial of Pat Wildrick. He'd beaten and robbed the Gates' family the year before. But after he was arrested for the robbery, he managed to escape from Baraboo jail. While I was driving the stage down through Ockness Park, I happened to see him in the woods. So me and a couple of fellas, we grabbed him and handed him over. But as he was being led away, he looked at me and he said, "I'll be seeing you later, young man." Well, that got me a little worried, I have to tell you, because I knew that the Wildrick gang was quite capable of carrying out his threats. Mind you, I didn't feel so bad after Gates was murdered, because at that time Wildrick was in the Columbia County Jail. Of course, everyone knew that he'd ordered the assassination, but the locals thought he might possibly get away with it. So they decided to take matters into their own hands. So on the evening of September 17th, 1869, I took some fellas in the stage and we went over to Portage. We met up with a bigger group of fellows who'd come in by train. And the following morning, Pat Wildrick was hanging from a tree. No one was ever prosecuted for his murder. You know, driving a stage was some of the most exciting and nerve-wracking years of my life. But after I quit, I went into farming. In fact, I had a few acres just down the hill here, and we did some truck farming. I was helped a lot by my only son, James Jr. He were a great help on the farm, and a great consolation to my darling Lizzie when I passed in 1921. Well, you folks had better be moving on, otherwise you're going to miss your connection. I hear tell you can get to Kilburn now in under an hour. Unbelievable. Good day to you all.
Good afternoon, and thank you for stopping by today. I am Alma Lou Wait. The X is silent in my name. You may not have heard of me before, but you sure have heard of the Ringling brothers, my cousins, and also the other cousins, the Gottlieb brothers. They had my mother, who was a molar. Really, it all goes back to my grandmother, who was Catherine Juliar, who came from a very large family, so that made my mother have 19 cousins. Our family, however, was not that large, but my mother had two sisters, Mary Salome, who married August Ringling, and then Mary Magdalena, who married Gottlieb Golmar. Both had large families. That's where the 19 cousins all came in. Our side was not that large. My mother only had one sister and two brothers. Her sister died when she was 8 years old. So it just left her and her brothers, Henry and Corwin. My mother married my father, Frank Lou, in 1881, and I came along in 1883. We lived in Milwaukee for a while, where my father had a saloon, and then he began working in a carriage shop and later moved to Baraboo. And my grandfather and two uncles had a carriage and wagon making shop, and so he taught my uncles how to make the finest wagons, and they began using them for the Ringling Brothers Circus. They made plain ones, they made fancy ones. There was a lot of fixing to do when they came back, however. The same year, the Ringlings never brought that circus back to Baraboo. By that time, my bachelor uncle Corwin was living with us, and my mother began taking in boarders. And at that time, there was a boarder who was named Arthur Wait. He was a locomotive engineer, and he took a shine to me, and I took a shine to him. We were married in 1922. Uncle Corwin died in 1946, and we were especially close, and he left the entire fortune to me. The money grew and grew, and Arthur, my husband, and I never had any children. So we began I had to figure out what to do with all that money after Arthur passed away. I started making gifts here and there, and my place dear to my heart was the Circus World Museum. I paid for the Hippodrome at the museum and named it in honor of Muller uncles. I also gave other gifts to the Circus World and the Mid-Continent Railway in North Freedom, Wisconsin. But I didn't give it all away in my lifetime. I was 98 when I died. And I was only 1 year old when the Ringling Brothers started their circus. So I almost lived till the centennial. Anyway, in my final days, I drew up my will. And it was a huge, big job. How to decide to give away over $1 million. So I began by giving some to family and to friends. The majority of it I left to the city of Baraboo, and some of it was to be used to fix the sidewalks in town. They were pretty bad shape at that time. But you know how the old saying goes, you can't take it with you. So it's nice to see that some of it was the good it was used for before I left. So remember to make a difference before you go so you can see where it went. Thanks for coming by today, and have a wonderful day in my beloved Baraboo.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Hopkins Memorial. I'm Altabelle Hopkins, and this statue commemorates my family. My father was Edmund Theodore Hopkins. He was born in New York State in 1838 and was a direct descendant to Stephen Hopkins, royal governor to the colony of Rhode Island and later signer of the Declaration of Independence. I guess that makes me and my sister direct descendants too, but I digress. My father was a remarkable man. He served in the Civil War and then received a law degree after the war. He then procured a charter for the Southern Life Insurance Company, of which Jefferson Davis was the president. Yes, the Confederate president was reduced to life insurance. Then my father worked for the Homestead Gold Mine in South Dakota. He was a part owner, although the mine was later owned entirely by William Randolph Hearst. My father then worked for the J.H. Bass Iron Company. They were the largest maker of steel wheels in the world. My father was a very busy man, but he loved nature and a good business opportunity. He owned the Lakeview Hotel at Devil's Lake, and we often spent the summers there. My father was married twice. His first wife and their child are buried in Louisville, Kentucky. My mother is Lind Ennis. She was born in Michigan, but I was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1875. My sister, Jessie Lind, was born in 1876. We were both musically gifted, but she had the most beautiful contralto voice. I would often accompany her when she sang solos. We were a beautiful family and spent pleasant days at Devil's Lake. Unfortunately, I had a heart condition that I probably inherited from my mother. I died at Devil's Lake in 1898 at the age of 23. Mother died next in 1917. My father, mother, and sister were traveling by train to Florida when my mother's heart gave out, and she died right there on the train. Father died next in 1924 at the ripe old age of 86. My sister, Jessie Lind, was his pride and joy as her musical career flourished. She sang with the big orchestras in Pittsburgh, New York, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. She even went abroad to study music, spending 2 years in Europe. While she was in Paris, she met an Italian sculptor named Dario Viterbo. They became good friends, and she later commissioned this work of his to adorn our family plot. The figure is offering flowers to the mortal while prayer rises to heaven. The poppies at the base unite earth and heaven, and on this side the star of birth, and the other the cross of death. The monument is quite striking, don't you think? My sister, Jessie Lind, was the last to be buried here in 1963, completing our family plot and uniting us all once again. Thank you.